Okay, it's recording. Hi, Professor Golan. Welcome to my class and welcome to this session, a short interview, hopefully. And before really starting, I would like to request you to share a little bit about yourself, that my student get to know a little bit more about you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today. My name is Guy Golan, and I'm an associate professor in TCU's Department of Strategic Communication. I do research on public opinion, focused on social and digital platform, with a real interest in international politics.
Thank you so much. These all are great areas: social media, digital media, which is a current topic, and public opinion. Wow. So this interview is about, I think, which we're focusing would be public diplomacy and nation branding. National. So my basic question, like a first question, because my students are all first year students, it's first year seminar class. So really wanted to like start from very basic, like what is public diplomacy? uh, how to really understand in a very layman term and try to like see that around us also in some way.
Very, very simple. Public diplomacy, generally speaking, is the attempt by government in nation A to build and maintain relationships with the people of nation B. That's public diplomacy. It's really very similar to public relations, but the focus here is on the organization as a government and the stakeholders as foreign publics.
Thank you for simplifying it. That's nice. So I can see that public diplomacy is directly related to, I would say, maybe interchangeably can be used for nation branding, like image building for a nation.
Not necessarily.
Oh,
So let's spend a few minutes on what nation branding is. And I would like to start with talking about what a branding refers to.
right.
So everybody knows what a brand is, right? I mean, if you ask anybody off the street to name 5 brands they love, they're probably going to say, well, depending on who they are, but they can list, probably a dozen, right? Target, Apple, Tesla, Amazon,
Right.
and Lululemon.
Right.
When you think about all those entities, all those brands, they all share something in common, and that is they're all made up. Every single brand out there is a product of folks who sat on Madison Avenue or any other marketing or advertising agency, and they said, let's come up with a brand that will do several things. So what do brands do? Brands offer a promise. They promise us as consumers something.
Right.
Brands offer us the ability to identify with something that shares our values and our mission in life. Brands allow us to become a part of the group. So why do people purchase a shirt, right? Such as Supreme, if you're familiar with that brand, for $200. Why do people pay so much money for a handbag, a pair of shoes, drive a certain brand of cars, etc., or a fancy watch? It's because that brand allows individuals to belong to something or to be a part of something they strive for. So that's what brands do. Well, can nations be branded just like Dasani water or Nike shoes? This is where the field of nation branding, this is a big question the nation brands ask. Now, I'm not sure what the latest count is, but I believe there are 197 nations in the world. And individuals don't have enough cognitive space to go into the intricacies, into the fine details of the complexities of each nation, right? You cannot explain a complex nation such as Pakistan, such as Nigeria, such as Brazil in 10 seconds or less. You just have no chance of that. Well, one of the things brands do, whether corporate or nation, they provide a cognitive heuristic, a shortcut, where you take something very complex and you sort of simplify it into a very simple idea. So when you think about Apple, you think about innovation. When you think about Nike, you think about athletics. When you think about Tiffany's, you think about luxury. Well, it's very similar with nations. When people think about France, they think about romance. When people think about Italy, they think about family. And when people think about a nation like Brazil, they think about football and fun and happiness.
Right.
So the attempt to brand nations is the attempt to take something that most people are either not familiar with or not familiar with enough, and to provide them with a very short cognitive heuristic that expresses maybe one or two main values. Now think about the challenge here, because most people, well, let's take the United States as an example. Most people in the United States could not tell you where certain nations are on the map, on the globe. If I offered, and I don't think most people can, anywhere in the world, right? So if I ask people all around the world to tell me the difference in geography or in, the ethnic composition or in the geopolitics of Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, or Azerbaijan, most people would not, in the United States, I believe would not even know what those nations are. And the problem is that the news media really does not cover the world as a whole. We know from research that most nations remain uncovered, receive no coverage or limited coverage. And therefore, there is a huge need for orientation amongst the public, and nations that can brand themselves successfully can go from unknown to something that's easily understood.
Wow. You explain it so well. Wow, that's right. The way nation really brands by cognitive heuristic, and wow, this is the way you explain it really well. Thank you so much. So I really want to like go a little forward and talk about the problems really a country really goes through sometime. For example, we are in recession, right? Like US in recession, many Asian countries are in recession, many European countries are in recession. So what are the challenges right now country have to really in terms of branding or attracting tourism or attracting investment? So what are the main challenges right now they have this current moment, especially in
Well,
coronavirus?
I'm going to argue that regardless of the times, anybody who attempts to engage in nation branding has one key challenge, and that is that nation branding cannot be successful in times when your nation is covered negatively. So no matter how much money you spend on nation branding, no matter which advertising, marketing, PR agency you will hire, no matter how many no matter how many resources you'll throw into this, if your nation's coverage in the mainstream global news media is negative, your nation branding will fail. I'll give you an example. Um, Mexico.
Right.
Mexico has always been very successful in branding, positioning itself in a very simple way. And when you think about most people, when they thought about Mexico, they thought about Corona. So they thought about the beach, relaxation, vacation, happiness. It was a very positive brand. Mexico had a very positive brand with all of its soft power assets of the food and the music and the rich culture. It's just a beautiful country, right?
Right.
And this worked really well. But when the drug wars really began in the last decade, when newspapers in the United States, in all around, Telemundo and all the international media outlets start showing pictures of decapitated bodies on the streets of Acapulco and of Tijuana and of all the major cities all across the nation, at that point, the nation branding could not succeed. So here's a key lesson I think most people should consider in nation branding. Media coverage trumps nation branding.
Absolutely.
Okay? So it really goes back to some fundamentals we know from the public relations field, right? There's a real clear difference between positioning, which is the attempt by any organization to control the narrative around it, right? So any organization, be it a not-for-profit, be it a political candidate, be it a corporation, they try to shape how people think about it. But the reputation is the manner in which people actually think about that organization, or they have no control over it. It's the same thing with nation branding. So if you, And nation branding is an attempt at positioning, essentially. When you think of this, I want you to think of 1, 2, 3. As soon as mainstream media coverage is inconsistent with those 1, 2, 3s, with those values you're trying to promote, with those issues you're trying to have associated with your nation or your brand or your organization, at that point, you're not going to be successful, especially if the coverage is negative and ongoing for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a very good point, that controlling the narrative and the power of national media for the branding. That's a very solid point. I have a question related to that. So there are some countries who have the press is controlled. It's not a free press. What's there's other country like democratic country. Uh, so where people don't think twice before really like in criticizing the government, and all over the press they're criticizing the government and the policies, which definitely transcend, like which goes to another countries also, and people make image of that country based on the news coverages, and which like democracy has definitely given the power to the people, but then how the people use it depends on that. So how the what role that a government or the country can play in their own branding when their own people sometimes don't support them?
Well, you're essentially asking, do democracies have an advantage or disadvantage over dictatorships, right? And the answer is that since the stakeholders for nation branding are foreign publics, the dictatorship has no control. So North Korea can 100% control any media coverage or any social media dialogue in that nation, right? If
Yes.
you tweet anything negative about the leader, they send you to prison. However, it doesn't matter because international media coverage of North Korea is overwhelmingly negative on a consistent basis. So dictatorships do not enjoy that privilege or any advantage in that manner. However, I do want to speak about democracies. The real key limitations of democracies is oftentimes nationals will post content that is not favorable towards their own government. I mean, that is almost a requirement of democracy. We have an open debate and people are allowed to disagree. And at that point, international rivals will take that kind of content and use it to undermine the brand. If you want to stay in nation branding, to undermine that their rival's brand. So I'll give you an example. If you follow Al Jazeera or RT, which is Russia Today, for the last 10 years, both Russia Today and Al Jazeera have been covering American race relations for a very long time in a very extensive manner, in a very negative manner, to create a false equivalency. And so Russia, what they did is they showed, during the Obama administration, they would show pictures of Ferguson burning down, and they would say, why are Americans criticizing Putin and his human rights? Look what they're doing to their own population. So this is just one example of how democracies, in a way, have a disadvantage when it comes to international brand management. But regardless, ultimately, in today's world, both democracies and dictatorships have to deal with a wide open conversation on social media and in international press about events happening in the world. And there's always a competitor, there's always a rival who tries to build their own brand at your expense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you put it in a very simple words. Thank you. This makes sense. I have I have a very related question. As we know, like every country has a different culture. So definitely different strategies apply to them for national branding and even the public diplomacy also. So, and also I would like to mention that and culture and also corruption also. I mean, they're not related in any way, but somehow sometimes corruption become a fabric of a country. So in these situations, when you're really high on corruption index, you somehow like putting away all these investors because their culture of business and their business strategies and values are not matching with you. So how to really, this is a tricky situation for any country, like how to really deal with that?
Well, how do you attract investments when your nation is when your economy is highly corrupted? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
Yeah.
It's quite a problem, right? I mean, we see this all the time. When this former Soviet Union fell down and we had all of these new Soviet republics, corporations that wanted to come in there almost knew that they're going to have to pay a corruption tax. And this is true for many emerging markets all around the world. And the short answer to your question is nations that are highly corrupt don't attract nearly as much investments as nations that have non-corrupt economies. You can bypass this. Ultimately, investors will look at the dollars and cents. Nobody wants to deal with a corrupt nation or corrupt economy.
Yeah, so there is no bypass for that. That's like no. That makes so much sense. So I think I've covered like major points, trying to make this video super long, but in the end I just really want to say that key takeaways from this video for my students in terms of what really required for to do a strategic communication for nation, like what are the key really points that needed to be addressed or keep in mind before really jumping into doing PR or public diplomacy for our nation.
Well, the answer is very simple. This is a controversial perspective, but I'll articulate it. I don't believe in nation branding. I don't believe that nation branding can work. What I believe in is that nations should identify their key stakeholders and not trying to engage everybody in the world. You cannot be successful in such engagement, but rather public diplomacy, nation branding, international public relations, whatever you want to call it, is ultimately it's a tool for foreign policy. And if nations want to be successful in their foreign policy, they have to understand who their key stakeholders are, what are the values that they share with those stakeholders, and what message is the most appropriate to share and engage those stakeholders. Now, the focus should not be on tactics. The focus should be on objectives, right? So I'll give you a great case study of failure. After 9/11, the United States wanted to win the hearts and minds of the Arab and Muslim world, which is essentially 1/5 of the world, right? Over 1 billion people. And they came out with these cookie cutter messages that were supposed to win everyone over and show everyone in the Muslim world how America shares their values and all that. It was a complete failure. The United States invested billions of dollars into soft power programs, and the outcome, if you look at anti-Americanism sentiments all around the Muslim world, it's been just going up and up and up with a few dips along the way, but it kept on going up. The reason why they failed is that they tried to sell America like a can of Coke. And that does not work when you look at public diplomacy from a public relations point of view. In public relations, it's about establishing authentic relationships that are mutually beneficial to the long term. And this is a big failure. So again, nation branding cannot trump media coverage, and nation branding is doomed to fail because when you treat all of your audiences as the same without segmentation, you're doomed to make a lot of mistakes. So my advice for countries is identify your stakeholders, identify your message, and then rather than engaging nation branding, engage in what we call mediated public diplomacy, which is to run your engagement campaign very much like a political party campaign. So when we have a presidential campaign, Democrats and Republicans are not trying to engage everyone, all the voters. They identify specific stakeholder groups, they build specific alliances, and they tailor messages based on those stakeholders.
That's a great point. Thank you. Like 3 main points: focus on stakeholders, focus on message, the key message you really want to give to your stakeholders, and focus on media campaign media. Though this is I've already told my last question, but just want to say that when you're really focusing on media now in the world of disinformation, misinformation, fake news, how how much we really like believing media and really focusing on media and thinking about, especially when it comes to like, like cross country, not just a small brand.
Yeah, very good question. And it goes back to the case study of the United States. People will not listen, will not pay attention to media, to any media content if they don't trust the source. So we know, for example, the Democrats don't listen to Fox News and the Republicans don't listen to MSNBC. They will not even turn the channel on, right? Selective exposure. It's the same for nations. So one disadvantage, for example, the Voice of America has is that it has the word America in the title. So anybody who dislikes America is not going to listen to Voice of America, right? We have that problem.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, really understanding your stakeholders and your shared values and the place where you can provide relevant content to stakeholders, that's the key to success. You may not want to go directly through your own media sources, but rather you may want to use paid and earned content or shared content, right? Through alternative channels, right? So the United States, I'll give you another example. Do you know which nation outside of the Arab world uses Al Jazeera as a tool for public engagement the most? Most people don't realize this, but the answer is Israel. Israel sends more experts to Al Jazeera than most nations outside the Arab world. And why do they do that? Because Al Jazeera has a credibility. So
Right.
viewers of Al Jazeera will pay attention to Al Jazeera. They may discount the Israeli spokesperson, but at least they'll listen because they trust the source.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now I wind up the interview. Thank you once again for talking
Thank
to
you.
me.